Turkey, Saudi Arabia. He accused these countries of funding and arming terrorists inside Syria. It's a line that I've heard since June of 2011. In the opening statements here, it just shows how high the hurdles are. Muallim's speech was supposed to be 10 minutes. As he got to the 20-minute mark, Ban Ki-moon, the UN chief, a consummate diplomat, tried to get him to wrap it up. They ended up sparring, and here's the exchange.
I have the right to give the Syrian version here in this forum.
Yes, of course, I do not
After 3 years of suffering, this is my right.
This, we have to have some constructive and harmonious dialogue.
I have
Please refrain
you
from
spoke
any
25
inflammatory
At least
remarks
I
and
need to
accusing
speak
some
30
member
minutes.
states participating here, so which will not be constructive at this time.
It is constructive.
That is not how the UN chief saw it. But Foreign Minister Muallim went on for another 20 minutes, and his bottom line, President Bashar al-Assad's departure, is not negotiable.
Well, let's talk about that, because this whole conference was based on the idea of negotiating a transitional government by mutual consent. Judging by the Syrian foreign minister's remarks, that's not their idea of what they're doing there at all. So does this mean the Syrian government has rejected the entire purpose of these talks?
It's the most important question of the day. Now, what the opposition says is, why are we going to sit down? What are we going to talk about? They are demanding an explicit acceptance and a 6-month timetable, and they say they will walk if they don't get it. Now, by the end of the day, Foreign Minister Muallim said some more conciliatory remarks. He said this meeting charted the first steps to dialogue. So, in fact, there may be these meetings on Friday.
Overall, Deb, how would you describe the mood or the tone of this conference after the first day?
What was striking to me, for the first time, you had opposing media here, Syrian state media and reporters for the opposition. They went to the same press conferences. They were in the media center at the same time. This is completely unprecedented for Syrians. Their behavior also shows how hard this is all going to be. Here's one example. Ahmed Fakouri. He was a superstar in Syria. He was an anchor man. But he defected. He now works for an opposition TV station. He saw his old colleagues here, and he said those were painful meetings. Here's what he said.
I was surprised. I tried to connect them because we are Syrian. I see them that they are kidnapped. I could escape. They couldn't say hi to me because they are afraid from each other.
That's Ahmed Fakouri, a defected TV news anchor, and it's a sign of how large the hole is in Syria's social fabric. Syrians are the most gracious people in the Middle East, but the war has changed them.
It's NPR's Deborah Amos covering the Syrian peace talks in the Swiss city of Montreux. Deb, thanks so much.
Thank you.
For some people, the juxtaposition of a sectarian civil war unimpeded by intense diplomatic effort has a familiar ring, and that ring recalls the war in Bosnia in the early 1990s. Yugoslavia had come undone. The patchwork of Serb, Croat, and Muslim populations descended into a bloodletting. Lord David Owen, the former British Foreign Secretary, was the European Union's negotiator for the Balkans, and he joins us now from London. Welcome to the program once again.
Nice to be here.
And when you've written recently about Syria, you've invoked the experience of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Do you feel a resonance of Bosnia in the current diplomacy over Syria?
Yeah, I think it's very like it was in September, October 1992, and a complete mess. And it doesn't surprise me. These negotiations have been very difficult to establish and will take time.
In those days, some faulted you for advancing a peace plan which accepted the facts on the ground, and it was said by doing so rewarded Serb aggression. How do diplomats solve this problem? How do you reconcile the desire to, say, keep the Syrian regime at the table, even though it's a regime that, we heard yesterday, tortured and murdered detainees by the thousands?
It is very difficult. I mean, if you stay in judgment with them, if you start taking sides, of course you'll be no use at all. So the main thing is to be extremely polite. But I mean, we had to, as you say, withstand a great deal of criticisms from people who seemed to believe that you could get a perfect solution from a wholly imperfect solution. There will not be a resolution in Syria without some very messy compromises. Keeping the country together will itself be a triumph.
Back in the early 1990s, you faulted Washington for encouraging the Bosnian Muslims with false hopes that led them to fight on. You said they were dreaming. Are the Saudis, the Turks, the Qataris, are they now falsely encouraging Syrian rebels to fight beyond a point that makes any sense?
I don't think you can pack up fighting, unfortunately, at this stage. You have to stand your ground. What I think you should try to do is get local ceasefires and, if you like, some form of humanitarian relief coming through. All this time you're trying to form structures which can give people a measure of security and, to some extent, decentralized power. And then on top of it, you're trying to construct an overarching organization for the whole country.
In 1994 and 1995, NATO used air power against the Bosnian Serbs. And by the end of 95, the Dayton Accords ended the Bosnian War. When one reading of that is that all of the steps achieved by incremental diplomacy that you've described really didn't end the fighting. What ended it was a concerted use of force that told the Bosnian Serbs their days were numbered. Did you accept ultimately that in the case of Bosnia, what ended the war was the use of military force from outside?
Oh, absolutely. I argued for force. I wanted to enforce the Van Zoen peace plan, as it was called, in May 1993. And had we done so, we'd have brought the war to an end 2 years earlier, with far less ethnic cleansing, and incidentally, with more territory given to the Muslims than through Dayton.
I want you to score what happened today as in Montreux, as you experience it. On the one hand, a conference has led to an agreement by the Syrian regime and at least the Syrian rebels' political leadership to engage in talks for several days. On the other hand, each side has made demands of the other that are absolute non-starters. Is that a great success to get them in the room, or do we simply now institutionalize the war and give legitimacy to each side?
I don't think it's a great success, but I think it's a success. And I think it's a sign that when Russia and America start to work together, then there starts to be a possibility of progress in Syria. The problem we had is for nearly 3 years, the Security Council failed to work. There was no dialogue at all. And China and Russia felt, with some justice, that we had stolen a march on them over Libya. They acquiesced by abstaining on the Libyan resolution. And then they felt that we used the no-fly zone for regime change. I don't think that the Americans, French and British handled this badly, but I do think they handled the aftermath of not trying to have a dialogue with Russia about their concerns, and to some extent China.
David Owen, Lord Owen, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
David Lord Owen was the European Union's negotiator for Bosnia back in the 1990s. Before that, he was British Foreign Secretary.